Alright, and welcome again. This is Robert Henry with the Survival Report, and getting into the wintertime here with our bees. We're going to look at a couple different things we can do to help our colonies overwinter, as they call them, to survive with decent enough numbers to really get a good start in the spring and such. We are having some unseasonably cold weather for this time of year. It's November 20th or the 21st, and here typically where we're at in the southern part of the U.S., we don't see a lot of really cold weather till about mid-December or so. So we're seeing a little bit more of that, and you're seeing a little less activity with the bees in situations like this. A couple of things we can do to get the colonies ready to overwinter is this area right here doesn't have much of a windbreak to it. So what we've done is we've just went and we've bought a couple of bales of just cheap hay, and anything like this would do. You could put up scrap plywood, something like that. We just, we'll get some use out of the hay with the rabbits after a while as well too. So we wanted to buy something that was useful and wouldn't look too entirely out of place or too run down and such. So, and this will give it a little bit of thermal mass and such, and a windbreak from the backside. So that is the area where we have our prevailing winds. Of course, we have our hive set up to face the south, kind of southeast here, so they do get the good morning sun in that as well too. What'll happen is as it gets colder, is the bees will basically form a big ball in the center of the brood chamber, and usually they'll start in the bottom. We'll take, for example, in this one here, they would start in what's considered the brood chamber, and that would be mainly the bottom deep hive here. And if you looked at it, everything's square here that we're working with, or rectangular rather. But you consider a basketball size cluster. They call them, when the bees do that, they call it clustering. What they do then is they'll start basically working their way up, and they cluster to control the heat and such, and what they're going to do is they'll eat on the outside of the cluster, and they'll work up and they'll work up and they'll work up, and they'll keep working up until, towards the end of the season, most of the bees will actually be in one of the upper deeps there, okay, because they've ate most of their food storage and such on the bottom, and they'll work their way up. So the biggest things with overwintering is we want to make sure they have plenty of food to make it through the winter. Starvation is a real issue, and like I said, this early winter here is going to screw us up. I can sense it already. And so we're gonna have to feed them pretty heavily. Now in the spring and in the early summer, I like to use these Boardman feeders, and there's no good way to keep those clean. So you're seeing the kind of blackish color they get to them and such over time. We switch the bottles out every other time, but even then they tend to sugar grows bacteria and such really easy. So. Anywho, these types of feeders, though, are not conducive to good feeding in the winter, because the bees have to break cluster, okay, and come down and get it from the front. I think these are fine feeders for springtime and summer and such like that, when they're coming and going anyway. But in the wintertime, they're not very good feeding types of feeders. Some folks don't like Boardman feeders at all. Say that it encourages robbing, etc., etc., etc. It's really just a personal preference for me. Okay, probably the best way to feed in the wintertime is what they call baggy feeders, and this is basically where we're making up a liquid sugar syrup. And in the wintertime, it's a little bit different formula. We typically do a 1-to-1 water to sugar, and this makes it thicker, and it really more is like the consistency of honey, versus in the spring it's a little bit more diluted, and it's more like the consistency of nectar and such. But what we can do with this is just a big 1-gallon baggie, okay, and we've poured our solution into there, and what we're going to do is we're going to take our top cover off, and we're going to lay this on the top of the frames, and then we're going to put a little slit down it. We're going to express or push a little of the fluids out and such. The bees know where to find it, and it's going to drip down into the cluster of bees. So essentially, it's going to be like dominoes delivering right to their to their door and such. So this is going to help them because they won't have to break cluster to get some food, or they won't have to go very far. So baggy feeding is a good way to go, as far as your winter feeding sources and such. One of the problems you may have with it, especially with these larger bags like this here, is you may find you have to put like a shallow super or something on here to contain the bag. That's okay. That will work. It isn't that big of a deal. The other thing we tend to do down south here is typically this time of year, as you start getting into fall and such like that, and even when we get into these colder weathers, wax moths are a heck of a problem, and they are demon spawn from hell. And if you remember in the earlier videos, we had 5 hives at this site right here, and we're down to 2. Okay, we had some terrible, terrible high losses from wax moths this year. So they quite literally are demon spawn from hell. But all joking aside, what you need to do with the wax moths, which helps, is crowd down your your bees and such. This hive here, this setup here, used to have another shallow super on there, and I think at one point in the season this one had 2 shallow supers on there. We were doing a little experimentation with that. And what we've done is the bees only had a little bit of honey, and then all that wax drawn out and such, and the shallows on both of those that we're talking about. We pulled those off because there was no way, when all the major nectar flows are gone, the bees aren't going to fill that up. It isn't like they're going to come out here in the dead of winter in December and go, oh hey, there's a nectar source, and suddenly start making honey. This is the time they more or less hibernate. I know it sounds stupid, but that's more or less what they do. So you need to crowd them down. The other thing that can be a problem in the winter is mice. Mice and all kinds of other little bugs. The beehive's nice and warm on the inside, and that's one reason you don't really want to open these guys this time of year, or these gals, any more than you have to. But there's all sorts of little animals that love to get up in these hives, burrow, make a mess, and poop everywhere, and maybe leave their babies and things like that, and you don't want that. So always make it a smaller entrance for them to have to defend. One thing you can do, they have the little mouse guards and things like that. You can make one of those with like hardwire mesh, if you have some scrap and things like that, hardwire cloth or hardwire mesh cloth, however they call that. One thing we did here a few months back is we went to 2 of these Boardman feeders, and because the colony was really growing, and we just wanted to kind of push them a little bit. Like I said, just doing some experimentation on some of this stuff. So they also have, then that's a much smaller area to defend from somebody trying to get in than per se that. So that's some of the other things you can do to help them over winter. They used to wrap these in in heavy black paper and such, like folks would use tar paper like you'd use before you put shingles down. It's not really recommended anymore due to the fact that they really did a lot of research, and ventilation is very important to a beehive in that as well too. So it's typically not recommended. Of course, again, here I'm down here in the southern part of the U.S. About the coldest we've ever seen down here is 17 degrees one time. That was it. It's snowed lightly twice in the 10 years we've been here. Okay, so you probably, if you're up north, or if you're in one of the Arctic tundra regions and such, you need to probably do some research with some local beekeepers. What I'm telling you as far as the overwintering might not apply correctly to your specific site. But get out there and get your bees ready for the winter, and we'll check up on these gals in the spring, and hopefully they'll overwinter just fine and be ready to start doing some work for us come early March. For the Survival Report, Robert Henry, thanks for watching. Have a good day.